Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We're about creators and honoring creators. And today we have an author, Chris Thomas, who wrote a book called Unexpected, the backstory of finding Elizabeth Smart. Welcome, Chris, to the show.
It's a pleasure to be on. Thanks, Gene.
Yeah. And joining me today is the lovely Beth Magnetic. She has such a magnetic personality. It's a great name. So anyhow, thanks, Beth. Beth's show is Mormon True Crime. And we probably will, if not simulcast or something, Beth will be able to air this on her channel as well.
Yeah.
And so we're all about cross promotion and collaboration, helping everybody, the rising tide lifts all ships kind of a thing. So let's see. First of all, we'd like to get a little background on Chris, like what was your 2 to 5 minute sort of experience growing up and like how you picked a college and life experiences that might have led and helped to, writing a book someday.
Absolutely. My mom is somebody that had a profound impact on my life. My mom came from a family that was not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She went to church with a neighbor, and I think at 10 or 11 was baptized, but always had a very different perspective. And so growing up in the culture, she always taught me to look at things differently and to be different. That was, I write a little bit in the book about growing up next door to an alcoholic who we fought my entire life. And her perspective on that was always very interesting. And he ended up having a very profound impact on me when I learned his true story after 13 years of being absolute adversaries, hating each other. But from a college standpoint, I chose to go to Westminster College in Salt Lake City. And largely the reason I chose to do that was because I had attended Skyline High School. It felt like 80 or 90% of the kids at Skyline, it wasn't true, but it felt like that they were active LDS and all going on missions and, doing the right thing. And I wanted an opportunity to go away to college, but not go away, but to have that experience where I was a minority from a religious standpoint, from a religious belief standpoint. And Westminster College at that time was a tremendous opportunity. There were 24 kids active in Institute. The Institute director used to say the University of Utah is anti-BYU, but Westminster's just plain old anti-Mormon. So I had a tremendous opportunity to really get to know people for who they were. And there were people, on both sides, those who were pious, a very small minority of people who were very pious as it related to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and those who had been in it and hated everything about it. And being able to kind of put those things aside and see people for people. So I had a tremendous experience at Westminster. After my first year, I served a mission in South Korea. Which was something that on both sides of my family, my father, my grandfather, they hadn't served missions. My maternal grandfather obviously wasn't a member. So that was something that wasn't necessarily expected. It was expected in the culture, but in the family, not necessarily. And it was something that I grappled with quite a bit. It wasn't something I necessarily really wanted to do. And then I really struggled as a missionary, but something that I learned early on, and in fact, I'm a deacon's quorum teaching advisor right now. I teach the deacons how to teach lessons, but what that means, they can't do it every week, so I teach periodically. So I recently taught a lesson on creativity, and I learned a lot of that on a mission because I wasn't the type of missionary that could knock doors, or in the case of Korea, it was street proselyting. I couldn't do that for 12 hours a day. And very quickly, it came down to, I'm going to go crazy if I continue to do this, and it's not productive for the most part anyway. How do we get creative? How do, in essence, and I don't know that I knew exactly what it was at that time, but I'm not a missionary. I'm a PR representative for the church. So I'm getting out, I'm friendshipping. I'm not looking at people as to, hey, is this a potential convert or not? It's, hey, can I bring this person under Christ? How do I serve this person? How do I connect with people in an interesting way? And kind of a fun example of that is every week would make banana bread, American banana bread. And sometimes would use that in a proselyting standpoint. People were more likely to want to sit down and have a piece of bread and shoot the bull and kind of hear a little bit about why I was there. Kind of going off here just a little bit, but I never saw conversion as something you could push on somebody. As missionaries, the role was presenting a message. And if somebody was interested in that and wanted to follow that and see if it was something that was for them and see if that was true, they could do that. But as missionaries, our job was just to build friends and to present that message and then see where it falls. But I made friends with nuns, with shopkeepers. We would take this banana bread and liters of Kool-Aid out to 20, 30 people every Tuesday. And
Really?
had tremendous success. And when I say success, that's not necessarily baptisms or people coming to church, but people that we connected with that saw and understood what we were doing. And I think it changed their perception a little bit. Instead of these pushy guys that wear suits and ties, these are actually really real people. And gosh, they're here on their own dollar and they're doing this for a couple of years. And then we got to know them as well. I think that in some places, I think this is becoming more prevalent, but that was a real cool opportunity. Another thing, I played basketball in high school. I could barely dunk a basketball in loafers, but we'd go and play basketball with kids. And if I could dunk it, I'd have the whole schoolyard out. You know, and when I say schoolyard, this is like teenagers would come out and talk, and we'd spend a few minutes at the end and tell them a little bit about why we were there. That was much more successful than chasing people and trying to get people who were busy and wanted nothing to do. And so anyway, I really looked at that, and I think that had a profound impact on me and how I looked at things, and always looking for opportunities to serve. How can I work, where and how can I serve somebody? How can I even do something small to make somebody's day a little better? Anyway, getting on my soapbox just a little bit here.
No,
I think missionary work
like
needs
that.
to be more about that. So that's kind of who I am, and maybe where you know, what the things that influenced me growing up and have been having a profound impact on me. I
like the idea of, you know, building connections. Your job wasn't to just go through like a factory and just teach, and either they're a good product or a bad product, right? You're building relationships in a way.
Absolutely. The same thing in college. I mean, I wasn't there to convert anybody in college. I was there I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand different schools of thought. I wanted to understand where different people came from and to truly understand and respect that and appreciate them for who they were. Now, that's an ongoing thing. I can't say I was perfect at that, still not perfect at that. But when I try to get beyond myself, when I try to be objective, I was a journalist in high school and college and initially in my career. You know, objectivity is something that's taught, and I really do try to look at things objectively.
Yeah. Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, "Travel is the death of prejudice," or something like that. Where when you find out what other people are like, it's really hard to be prejudiced against a group of people, because there probably were lots and lots of nice people that were not Mormon. I don't know, what was the main religion in South Korea?
I mean, Buddhism is more a philosophy. There was a fair amount of evangelical Christians. There were lots of sects, very competitive. A bus would pick somebody up where there's a church, you know, across the street, and would take them 5 miles down the road to a bigger church, and lots of competition for membership and money, and that would sometimes get lost. Religion would get lost in that a little bit, but so yeah, that definitely came into play, Gene.
I had a friend who went to the Pusan mission, and one thing that really stood out to him was sort of like the professionalism of most South Koreans. He got to have business cards, and it was passing out business cards and building connections sort of in a sort of more of a formal way is how he did it.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
I live in an extremely LDS neighborhood down here in Mesa, and I've had missionaries come to my door, and I'm ex-Mormon now. But the one that made the biggest impact on me was like you were talking about, Chris, where he just came in and he's like, I'm not here to get you to come back to church. I'm here to just serve you. What can I do for you? And
that's right. That's the most Christian thing anybody can ever do.
That softened my message on Mormon true crime more than anything, was kindness and service, and conversations with people like Jan Broberg, who had these really kind, beautiful hearts that they shared that were not like just looking for a number. So I love that you said that.
I think that's true Christianity, though. That's not just exclusive to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's something that transcends that. But I believe when members of the church practice that, they are more Christian, and it really it follows that, his example. And it's something that I think we can strive to do better in, frankly. I think we get too caught up sometimes, almost the business part of it, right? We get so caught up in the business of it and lose sight of what's not only most important, but what's most effective.
Yeah.
Right. So did your mission change how you viewed college going forward?
I definitely was a better student. I think most return missionaries would say that. But going back, and then, when I went back to Westminster, as among the undergraduates, kind of core group of undergraduates, I was the only return missionary. So now I had it, basically, was wearing it on my sleeve. I had professors that would challenge me in classes and things like that. And I was a little bit passive with it. I wasn't there to try to prove something, nor was I as a missionary. It was more of, all right, tell me why you believe that way, or help me understand better where you're coming from, and not letting it phase me. I think regardless of what we believe or who we are, the way in which we live and the way in which we treat other people, it is really the most important thing, and it's the thing that defines us. But I think it also benefits us.
So when you decided to go to Westminster, how did your LDS friends react to the fact that you weren't going to go to BYU or Utah?
The school was not as well known at that time, and a lot of people said, "Why would you go to that Catholic school?" And it's like, "Oh man, please tell me you're not that ignorant." Yeah,
I would have said, "Why are you going to England?" Westminster
Right.
sounds like
Why
an
would you
English
go there?
school.
It does.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, why aren't you going to the U? Why aren't you going to the Y? And it was, for me, it was the perfect spot. It was small. I had the opportunity. Communications was something that I was passionate about. I wrote for my student body newspaper in high school, and had the opportunity beginning as a freshman, to do it at Westminster, and had tremendous professors, small classes, and just really great connections that positioned and really led to where I am now. I was able to, I think I worked about a dozen internships through the 3 years of college, and in the communications industry, both of you know this. It's not really about the degree; it's really about the experience and what can you do for me. And I just had tremendous mentors and teachers, both at the college and outside of the college.
Cool.
That's amazing.
What was your favorite internship?
I got to work with the Salt Lake Olympic bid and then organizing committee. I was there for about 2 years, and it led to a couple of really interesting experiences. I assisted with PR in Budapest in 1995 when Salt Lake won the bid for the 2002 games, and then had the opportunity also to work in Atlanta in 1996 as a result of those connections and the opportunity working with them.
Now, did that have any bearing on you getting involved with the SMART case, since the Olympics were shortly before Elizabeth was abducted, 6 months before, something like that? Oh, I was just wondering, because you were already involved in something so big, did that lead to this?
I think, as I write about in my book, there's connections throughout life. I believe this is true, though, really for everybody, that we have certain experiences and people that come into our lives that prepare us for future opportunities, for future experiences, for future adversity. And so working on that in Atlanta, I was really fortunate. I was there when the bombing occurred, and ended up working with the FBI on the press conferences. I was the microphone boy. I'm sure if I went back and found the footage, you'd see my arm somewhere, with the mic, holding it to whomever. But was behind the scenes, kind of listening and seeing how they worked, how things took place. It was, that was just one small thing, but that was preparatory in the future for that. I think there were things from a communication standpoint that definitely prepared me for it, and there were things from a personal standpoint that really helped me to learn and to have the right skill set and the right temperament in the moment when it was most important in helping the SMART family.
Wow.
So you were living in the neighborhood. You were attending the same ward?
No. So how I got involved with the SMART case is Elizabeth's cousin Sierra was a senior at the University of Utah, started an internship with my firm 2 weeks before the abduction. Her father, Tom, was best friends with my business partner at the time, with his father, and was almost like an uncle to one of my business partners. The other business partner, Missy Larson, It was Ted Wilson's daughter, and grew up in the ward where Elizabeth was abducted. So we had kind of three connections. We offered to help. Initially, they said no, and after a day or two, when the press contingency it swelled to craziness, I would say, they said, please come and help us. And we thought it would be something that would be a few days, maybe a week. Yeah, we were a little bit idealistic, but they would find her and we'd have a party and we'd go back to our day jobs. And for me, it ended up being a 9.5-month sabbatical and one of the craziest and most meaningful experiences of my life.
I bet that. How did you recover from that? Have you been able to recover from what an intense experience that was?
Sure. It was really difficult. I would say I'm still recovering. To look at that, it was interesting after releasing the book. So much goes into writing and releasing a book, especially on the scale of this one. It was a national book. I was on Good Morning America, did a lot of national media, and it's just nonstop. And I had a bit of a crash about a month after the book came out, and found myself just really irritable. And I've always, I think, going way back, but especially post Smart Case, I've always been a big proponent of counseling. I have a tremendous therapist whom I work with, and at that point I said, what's going on? And she was able to kind of dissect and go back through some of the trauma I was reliving, and we were able to work through that. But therapy is something that I think is good for everybody, but in particular in the work that I do, it's absolutely essential.
We're also going to put a link to your YouTube channel. You have some videos of interviews that you did with the media when the book came out, and also snippets about each chapter, I believe.
Several of the chapters, yes.
Yeah.
There are kind of some little teasers there.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, it kind of does two things. Whether if you're kind of like, do I want to read this? It gives you a bit of an idea about it. But what I found is a lot of people who read the book found it really interesting to go back, because I will cite an interview or a television piece or a person, and then in this 2-3 minute snippet will actually show that actual interview and talk just a little bit about it. So it's somewhat of a companion to the book.
Your videos were really interesting because, coming into this, I was thinking like, oh, I know her story inside and out. Like, I've listened to her book. I've watched all the movies, the documentary. I've watched it all. And then I start listening to your snips of what you talk about in the chapters. And I was like, wait a second, the Elizabeth Smart Search Center? What? And getting to hear about those types of things. It's completely going from the different angles. So you're not just hearing about the trauma that Elizabeth went through. You're hearing about everything that happens on the other side, which is a completely different angle to the story. So I'm excited to read it now that I know that it's there. It sounds amazing. So, and I literally have spent dozens and dozens of hours just to prepare for, when I told Elizabeth's story. But there was just so much that I learned just watching your 2-minute clips that I had no idea. I thought I knew it all. And I did not.
Thank you.
Yeah. You mention in those clips that I've watched, and I know that you've started to mention it here, your neighbor Baker. And Baker has this profound impact on you. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. So Baker was my next door neighbor. He was the most cantankerous, angry, vile at times. I think I learned just about every word of profanity from Baker, from listening to Baker.
That's important.
Yeah, of course. There's certain
life
things.
skills.
There's always life skills that you take away. He's real world, though. I mean, I've worked with really tough people in New York, and worked with tough people during the Smart Case. And Baker, I think, really prepared me, gave me some thick skin. But I was a basketball player. I had a basketball court out on my driveway, and ball would roll over to Baker's. Even if it didn't roll over to Baker's, he would turn his sprinkler on the driveway. He would come and swear and scream at me, tell me he was going to call the police. This was a daily occurrence. And my ball went into his yard. At one point, he started telling me he was going to shoot me, not to come into the yard. And of course, I went and grabbed the ball. But and as a kid, and it was a different era, if somebody said they were going to shoot you now, it'd probably be a very different response. But grew up next to him, despised him. It was embarrassing. If I had friends over playing basketball and the old man came out and started, cussing, it was kind of embarrassing. didn't know a whole lot about him, and don't want to spoil the book, but the book is a braided memoir. Half of it is managing the SMART case, and half of it was growing up next to Baker, and the tremendous lessons that I learned from him that really prepared me. And it was actually in writing one of the first drafts of the book, not the book, excuse me. I wrote this in kind of two parts. During COVID, I wrote the Baker story, and at the end, I was writing. I wrote help me with the word here, boy. Early in the morning, not enough Diet Coke today. The part that comes at the end after the book.
Oh, the prologue.
Yeah, the prologue. I think, yes, thank you. So the prologue. Yeah, that's a tough word. Here we go. So the prologue. I wrote a prologue, and there was an amazing experience that happened at the very end of the SMART case. It kind of tied everything together and started to see the profound impact he had. My wife read it and said, "This is your book. You need to tie the SMART case into Baker." I said, "Honey, you're crazy. That would never work. These are two books." And she was pretty adamant about it and said, "Here's how we're going to tie them together." And I ended up working with a woman named Marion Roach Smith, who is an expert out of New York on memoirs. And she helped me really work on structuring it as well, and tying those two stories together. But it's, for me, one of the most amazing aspects of writing this book was going back and realizing how many things from my childhood, how many things from Baker influenced me in being able to work with the SMART family. Baker has a daughter who is somewhat reclusive. I tried to connect with her several times. I finally left a book with a note. And the note, I said, "You'll never believe this, but your father had a profound impact on rescuing Elizabeth Smart." And I'm so grateful to him. I hope I portrayed him in an appropriate light in the book. And I heard back through somebody who has contact with her how much she appreciated it. But for me,
wow,
and I think that's something to keep in mind. It's something I try to think of today. So that person that doesn't mesh with me, that person who drives me crazy, or that person who I least want to see, there's a lesson. There's something for me to learn from them. There's something that maybe is preparing me for something in my life, or something that my family might need. And so trying to be more open-minded, I think it's one of the criticisms and justified criticisms of the LDS culture, is that we tend to be a little bit tribalistic. We tend to be even clannish, and we can't
Echo
look
chambers.
past ourselves. Yeah, echo chambers. And so getting outside of that, there's always something to learn. And often the things we learn and those rich experiences we have aren't possible if we stay too close to that which is most familiar and easiest for us. And so Baker, for me, got me out of my comfort zone at a very young age and kept me there for a long time. Long and short, without, again, spoiling it, the day before I left on my mission, I was driving. My family had moved from the neighborhood that I grew up in a few months prior. I was driving through there, and on a whim, parked the car and went and knocked on Baker's door. He was shocked that I would knock on his door, and told him I was leaving for Korea, wanted to say goodbye. And we ended up, I thought it would be 5 or 10 minutes, and we ended up speaking for 3 hours. And I learned so much about him and why he was who he was. And he apologized to me at one point, and I, in tears, apologized to him, understanding what he had been through, and his true character was a life-changing experience. And I think with the SMART case, I really tried to approach people in that case from a similar standpoint of, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you've been through. I don't know why a journalist is being so difficult to deal with. Let's not judge. Let's try to find some common ground, and in the same vein, represent, the SMART family in the best way possible. But relationship building is something I learned on the mission, but it's something that is so important today, when we can get outside of what's happening at face value, and really work to try to connect and see people where they are, and appreciate them for where they are, and work together in the best way possible.
Well, we're going to have to thank your wife from here for giving you the inspiration to create basically a unique experience for the reader.
I love
that. And that brings to mind, why didn't you write a book 6 months after Elizabeth was found and take advantage of all the publicity?
Right. I thought about it. It just didn't feel right. And And I'm really glad I waited, because I wouldn't have written the Baker story. It's interesting. I've done dozens and dozens, maybe 100 book clubs. And the conversation seems to revolve more around Baker than the Smart case, at least initially. And for me, I'm really proud of that fact that I could tell his story, that he might be seen and honored as a hero in a way that was lost. And there's some redemption for me personally, being able to tell his story. So grateful that it did take 20 years to write it, and also having that opportunity to really think and understand. And when I managed the Smart case, I was a newlywed. My wife and I celebrated our first anniversary the day before Elizabeth was abducted. I didn't have children. I just didn't have a lot of life experience that would help me to maybe better understand that experience. So being able to go back and relive it. And there were opportunities with that as well. At one point, there is a person, and I want to leave it kind of at that, because again, I think, I don't want anyone who actually wants to read the book to go and say, "Oh, he talked."
I'm reading it.
I know what's going to happen there. But there was an individual in that I really struggled with throughout. That I felt had taken advantage of me, had gone around me, and really caused some challenges. Had an impact on the family waiting to come forward with information that ultimately led to Elizabeth's rescue. And I really had hard feelings towards this person for a long time. In one of the early drafts of the book, my personal editor, I had a personal editor that I worked with that is here in Salt Lake. And then I worked with my publisher, had a couple of editors in Nashville and New York that worked on the book. But my personal editor, which I worked with on the early drafts, she read one of the chapters and she's like, "This comes off between the lines as angry." And I don't think it represents, it's just it's such a departure from the rest of the book. I don't want to tell you what to write, but I think you need to go and think about it. And I spend a lot of time trying to look at that situation and this person from kind of a 360 perspective, take myself out of it. Why did they do what they did? I even talked to some people who knew this person. And through that process, had a completely different understanding. And I write about it. I don't think I say, "Oh, and I sat down and thought about this for a week and spent a lot of time cogitating on this person," but was able to provide some perspective there. And there were some others as well, where in the moment that was happening so fast, frenetic pace when Elizabeth was abducted, and then having the opportunity to, okay, let's pause, let's take a moment, let's think about this, let's turn a different figuratively, let's put a different camera angle on this. Okay, what do we see? Okay, how do we see that? And so I write about some of those observations. And for me personally, that was really meaningful, to be able to go back and see and understand the people and some of the events a little bit differently. And there's no way, Gene, that I would have had that 6 months, 5 years, even 10 years after Elizabeth was abducted.
Yeah. And Beth mentioned, how are you dealing with things after? And I'd imagine that writing the book became sort of like a therapy.
Both. It did a little bit. It also triggered some things. My wife and I, I started out, I'm probably a little bit overly maybe dramatic and thoughtful, but we did premarital counseling before we got married. It was an absolute prerequisite for me. And we've and for a while as newlyweds, we would do a check-in annually with a therapist. I've always had a relationship with a good therapist. And so during that period, we engaged, and as we have had needs, we've engaged the therapist more often, but have had that relationship and that ability to work through things, both related to work and family, but whatever it might be, any of the challenges we've had a great consultant who can help us kind of think and work through it, and has led to a really rich relationship. But we were working with her a fair amount through that process, just because it was bringing new things up, or it was triggering some old things that we had worked through, but they were now fresh again.
So I was actually thinking we could wrap up this part of the show, and we'll talk more in a little bit. And I'd like to thank everybody for watching. We're going to do something new. The rest of this story will be sort of behind a paywall. We've never done that before. After doing the show for 8 months, it'd be nice to make a nickel here and there. So we're going to see if this is the one that brings in our first, the dollar bill that, we could frame, on the wall, our first dollar from it. And so, yeah, so Unexpected, the backstory of finding Elizabeth Smart, that is, we're finding out more right now, the extra backstory. Like Beth mentioned on your YouTube channel, there's more backstory. And so that, in a way, enriches our lives. And that's what, Latter Daily Digest is trying to do, is bring a different experience to our viewers, the creative process, other little angles that maybe weren't covered in any other interviews. Just before we sign off, I want to ask you if you've been on a show in the last year that you feel was a really good interview that explained a lot, that people can provide a link to, maybe, that people can see more of you, basically.
Absolutely. It's probably the favorite one I've ever done. It came out just a couple of months ago, and it does work. It does have a fair amount about the Smart case, but it goes broader than that. And it's a podcast about different careers. They look at everybody from a beer vendor to an FBI special agent. And so I was really fortunate to be the subject for Crisis PR. In talking about what I do and how it's approached, and they did such a phenomenal job. It's produced, so it was a 90-minute interview that they cut down to 30 minutes, and just do a really tremendous job in demonstrating. I think it's hard for me to talk to my friends and family and explain what I do, and it's like, just listen to this podcast. Get a little bit of a better idea. I think there's some perceptions on kind of what my job is, and this really gets into, you did a really great job in getting it out.
It's almost like Career Day interwoven with finding Elizabeth Smart.
Yes, to a degree, and a very nice short synopsis. Why I'm totally blanking on the name of the podcast is my favorite one ever, and I can't remember the name.
That's right. We'll get the link, and it'll be in there right now, so people will be so interested.
And before we get any comments on this, right? It's an epilogue, not a prologue. I got that wrong. So
there you go.
I thought that didn't sound right either. I've been traveling the last 2 days a significant amount, and I'm like, which time zone am I in? Where am I right now? So thank you. Right. Thanks for help on that, Beth.
I Googled it over here, and I was like, prologue is not right. What is it? So
thank you.
So thanks everyone for watching. Like and subscribe. Everybody have a great rest of the week. All right. Bye-bye.